Hi, this is my review of Symbaroum Core Rulebook. Symbaroum is a Swedish dark fantasy role-playing game. It has a very strong atmosphere. Its atmosphere speaks to you. It communicates this world of bleakness, of mystery, of decadence and dread. Now, let's talk about the quality of the PDF. The quality is just great. The only thing that I think could have been improved is the addition of hyperlinks to the index at the end. But other than that, everything is just perfect. You have bookmarks, a table of contents with hyperlinks. You have a nice layout with some embellishments between chapters. You also have maps for different locations and the game world. And I didn't find any typos. And the font is just really easy on the eye, so everything looks great. But the thing that stands out the most is the artwork, in my opinion. The illustrations are very powerful in communicating the world of Symbaroum. I'm starting to think that Swedish expression is quite useful to communicate this sense of a wilderness untamed and filled with horrors and danger, of moodiness and bleakness. It reminds me a bit of the movie Wither and the PC game Year Walk, both of which are Swedish forms of art and entertainment, and they share that with the art style in this game. In my opinion, they communicate that sense of a world in darkness and with a lot of danger, peril, and creepiness all around. Now, let's talk about the contents of the PDF. The world of Symbaroum happens when the kingdom of Umbria is under assault by the Dark Lords, which have amassed huge armies, and the armies are just destroying everything in their path. And they managed to capture Queen Corinthia. However, the queen was rescued by a group of brave champions, but the queen was disfigured physically and probably mentally as well. So the queen had to put a porcelain mask on, and she commanded her armies to destroy or at least drive back the armies of the Dark Lords, which she did, but it feels like a temporary victory in my opinion. The queen then proceeded to subjugate the different barbarian groups around her kingdom. Some of them grudgingly became her allies, others are still her enemies, and some others were enslaved. So it's a world of uneasy alliances and paranoia overall. You have information on the different factions and very detailed information on places that serve as hubs for your adventure. For example, you have Thistlehold, which is basically a frontier town where the strong rule and the weak are looked upon with contempt. You also have Lindaros, which is the high seat of Queen Corinthia. It's a city of decadence, of danger and intrigue. You also have Karbosti, which would be the seat of the barbarian clans. They are ruled by witches. And some of the citizens of Lindaros sometimes carry out pilgrimages to Karbosti and communicate with sacredness of the world. But this is a very dark world. In my opinion, it feels like a very dark version of a world similar to the Lord of the Rings. But while in the Lord of the Rings, you have contrasts, like you have this world of sunlight and greenery, and then you have these other places like Mordor, of darkness and decay. In Symbaroum, there are just a lot of tones of gray and brown, just like the illustrations. It's a world where nowhere feels entirely safe, where heroism shines, but it's quite difficult to do so within all that darkness. Now let's talk about character creation. You can create a character belonging to any of the core races. You have two variants of humans, one civilized variant and a more barbarian type of human. You also have changelings, which are basically children that were supposed to be humans, but as they grew up and developed, they became looking otherworldly and elvish. Some say that elves replaced human babies with their own children for some unknown purpose. And you have ogres and goblins. All of these races feel like they are just in a very sort of like alliance for convenience type of relationship. It doesn't feel like they trust each other pretty well or in a deeper sense. And there are no elves in the player character races, because elves in this game are enemies. They feel quite alien in their way of thinking. And they said that long ago they made a pact with humans, and that humans shouldn't be trespassing into the wilderness, into the forest of Davokar. But humans do not remember such a pact. It could be an elvish invention or plot. So the elves aren't exactly friendly in this game. Your player character has different attributes that represent his areas of expertise. But besides that, you can create any character that you like. This is not a class-based system, although you have some suggestions in ways on how you can build your character. So for example, you have archetypes: the warrior, the mystic, and the rogue. And each of these archetypes is further specialized or divided in occupations. So for example, if you choose a warrior, you can expect to be highly efficient at destroying things or killing things with your weapons. And you have occupations such as berserker or duelist or captain. You usually solve problems by fighting, but you also have some abilities. Perhaps you are persuasive, or perhaps you are discreet and very fast. So you don't feel obligated to play a specific type of warrior. You can play a finesse one, or a stronger type of warrior, and someone more social oriented. You also have the mystic, and the mystic could be built as a sort of like a shaman type of character, or a witch, or perhaps a thurge. So you have that sense of, you could build a character that feels more on the sorcerer side of things, or more on the clerical side of things. And you also have the rogue, and the rogue is specialized in serving as a scout, solving problems with his wit, and is also decent in a fight. So you have different occupations such as ranger, witch hunter, or thug. So there are many ways in which you can build your character, but these archetypes and occupations are just there to give you some sort of guideline. You also have traits that make each race different. At first the differences seem cosmetic, but the traits really make the races different between one another. So an ogre is going to be quite tough, a changeling is going to be a shapeshifter, and humans, depending on the place they come from, could be quite resourceful with their contacts, or they may be quite skilled at bushcrafting. Now, abilities are some of the things that I like the most of the process of character creation. And they are just different, they feel like special skills or powers that you can use during combat and sometimes outside of combat. And these are tiered abilities, that is, they improve as your character develops and becomes stronger. So for example, if you take the berserker ability, first you will be able to rage, but your defense will suffer for it. If you become an adept at entering this berserker rage, you're going to have a reaction that allows you to ignore damage besides dealing powerful hits. And if you can become a master of the berserker rage, your defense will be enhanced while raging. So you have many different abilities like dominate, beast lore, backstab, and they can all be developed to build at the same time the type of character that you want. And you also have mystical traditions, which have to do with casting spells and rituals. They are divided by paths such as theurgy, sorcery, wizardry, But you can also become an independent mystic that feels quite eclectic in his or her choice of spells and powers. Now, magic in Symbaroum is a very serious and dangerous thing. It's basically a violation of the rules of reality, and every time you cast a spell, you gain corruption. And corruption is something to be feared. Corruption could end up transforming your character into an aberration, and your character will not be able to be played as a player character unless the game master allows you to do it. And the stigmas are very well represented in my opinion, and you gain corruption in many other ways, not just magic. Maybe by using relics or binding yourself to relics, or going into some of the more corrupt parts of the forest of Davokar. You're going to end up as a corrupt character if you're not careful, and some corruption is just temporary, but there's also permanent corruption, so it's something to keep in mind. Something that represents like the heart of the darkness, so to speak, in Symbaroum is the forest of Davokar. This is a forest filled with mystery, secrets, and runes. Runes of the lost kingdom of Symbaroum. Symbaroum was this civilization that reached its peak and suddenly suffered a catastrophic downfall, and nobody knows exactly what happened or why. And to go into Symbaroum, you're going to have to wield the most powerful spells and equipment that you can possibly find. And when it comes to equipment, you have a nice selection. Something that I liked about equipment is that armor doesn't give you a passive damage reduction value. You have to roll a die each time you are hit to see how much damage you can stop from getting to you, from going through the armor and into your skin. So it's something to keep in mind, and I think it adds a lot of some nice randomness, and that represents sort of like when an enemy is attacking the weak spots in your armor. So you have many ways in which you can build your player character, and you don't feel obligated to be a specialist in just fighting. If you had a group specialized in stealth, you could try to avoid most of the combat encounters in an adventure and get to your objective. Each character has a shadow, a unique aura or spiritual representation of his or her alignment to civilization or to nature, and corruption is also shown on that shadow, so you have to always be careful, because there are characters that have the ability to perceive the corruption in you, and perhaps there could be some fanatics that could go after you. This also serves as a sort of an adventure seed for a campaign. Now, let's talk about the core system, how you carry out checks. It's quite simple. You roll a 20-sided die and try to roll below a certain attribute and to succeed. But this is modified by the difficulty of a particular task or by the attribute of another character if it's an opposed check. And combat feels quite easy, but with a bit of tactical depth as well. It's also based on checks. The players are the ones making the rolls. The game master can focus completely on running and managing the adventures and the campaign. So the players are going to roll both to attack and to protect their characters by making different checks. And you also have different considerations, not taking into account all of the abilities that feel like special attacks. You have to consider line of sight, flanking, when to use first aid on or a herbal remedy, blind fighting, disengaging from melee, all of that. Your characters also have a pain threshold, so if you suffer too much damage, your character could end up being knocked down, or the enemy could even make an extra attack against you. Of course, this applies to your characters as well, so you have a pretty good chance of dealing a very lethal series of attacks when you fight an enemy. And dying is somewhat easy in this game, because when your character levels up or develops, you're not going to be obtaining these absurd levels of power or epic, depending on the game that you are playing. Your character always feels of flesh and blood, and in that way, combats feel somewhat more feel faster, and each combat should be considered as a very important matter of life and death. You're not going to be able to take on on an army single-handedly, so that's very nice, especially for the theme of the game. Now, the Game Master Guide section is very good in my opinion for somebody who has never played as a game master. You have all the information to build sessions, what to do before, during, and after the session, and further rules on how to handle problems from combat to social situations, how to handle shadow and corruption, and optional rules that add a bit more lethality to the system, in my opinion, such as critical hits and fumbles, and some other things. You also have rules how to handle travel and encounters, information about money and artifacts. And artifacts in this game feel like they are quite risky. You just can't use them like it's a regular thing. They are more on the Call of Cthulhu side of things. Overall, Symbaroum really feels like a darker version of The Lord of the Rings. It's not exactly a good comparison, but some of the themes are shared between those stories. But while The Lord of the Rings have these very sharp contrasts of light and greenery with darkness and decay, Symbaroum constantly feels dark and under a threat and paranoia. So later on you have information on monsters, and the monsters are quite flexible for carrying out different types of adventures, even though they all feel quite disturbing and creepy and alien. You have a selection of elves, trolls, human adversaries, spiders, different predators and reptiles, winged creatures, abominations, and undead. And if your character is not careful, there are many things in the Forest of Davokar that could end up cursing you or infecting you with the condition of being undead or becoming a sort of like an aberration or abomination. You also have a free introductory adventure. This is something that I think was a great addition, because this introductory adventure really shows you what Symbaroum is all about. There are many ways in which you can solve the challenges in this adventure. I won't be talking in depth about it because I don't want to spoil the fun. I know some players are watching this review, not just game masters. But this adventure, called The Promised Land, offers a lot of encounters that have to do with combat, and there is room for diplomatic encounters and problem solving. And it's really an adventure that is built around the idea of presenting the world of Symbaroum to your player characters, of getting them involved and interested in the lore of the setting, and most of all on the atmosphere and the mood of the setting. So this is a great introductory adventure, and it feels like the starting point for a campaign. Well, let me tell you what I think of Symbaroum. I think this is a great dark fantasy role-playing game, quite unique, even though it takes some elements from other great stories such as the Lord of the Rings, and even of video games such as Dark Souls, Demon Souls, and Bloodborne. The darkness and dread communicated through the theme and the rules is quite pleasing, because it feels fresh, and the game is not exactly rules light, but it doesn't feel too complex either. So it's like a sweet spot. It hits a sweet spot, allowing you many opportunities to handle a satisfying storytelling experience. This is a game that reminds you of the hidden terrors of your imagination, of thinking that there's something behind that shadow or hiding there in the darkness. As you enter in Davokar, into the forest of Davokar, your character is going to feel threatened and scared, and under the constant threat of corruption, of becoming a monster while facing the monsters. Well, thanks for watching my review. If you have any comments or questions, please let me know. See you later.